All right, guys, we are coming to the end. Just a couple more videos. We're going to take the end of the war. I'm going to break it into two videos. One very brief one I'm going to do right now, which is going to be about the end of the war in the European side, and then I'll do another one that will have more of an activity for you to do based on the Pacific. All right, so as per usual, here's what you'll need. So you will need the note-taking sheet on the end of World War II. That's posted on Canvas. Um, we won't be using that right for this video, but we will use it for the next one. Then you'll need the atomic bomb decision student handout, which again for the next video. There's two brief readings, one from a Russian standpoint and one from a US standpoint, again for the next video. And then, yeah, another quick write about this stuff. Again, trying to keep you honest, making sure you're doing your work, making you think about it, reflect on it so that we can be prepared for the AP exam. So let's get started here. So there's an expression you should learn, theater. There were realistically three theaters during World War II. The first one is, or the three are Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. We're going to take time to talk about the European theater. So this is the war that takes place in Europe. This is it's obviously a world war. We talk about that all the time. It's massive, it's huge. It's being fought literally almost in every corner of the world. And so the European one, maybe the one that we tend to talk about more in the US, and we'll just kind of go through the details here. All right, so first thing we want to talk about is the invasion of Russia, also known as Operation Barbarossa. So if we go back just a few videos, we talked about this. There was this non-aggression pact between the Soviet Union and Nazis, Hitler. And so the thought was Hitler was going to basically take out everybody in Western Europe, and then eventually turn his attention to Russia. And I talked about it then, I'll just bring it up again. So Hitler will violate that agreement and he will invade Russia. Now, why is he invading Russia? So, he's invading Russia for a few things. One, oil. All right. Kind of playing on what's going on in the background here. The Germans had taken control of North Africa. North Africa was very rich in oil, but they had lost control of it between the efforts of the British and French colonials had basically pushed them out of Africa. So they suddenly had a shortage of oil. And so Russia has a large supply, so they're going to invade Russia to get the oil. One of the other reasons I didn't put down here, but it's worth mentioning, is uh, they going back to the Holocaust here, we're interested in trying to kind of invade Russia to get to the access to the large Jewish population. Um, we know that was a relatively significant reason because even as this war is ending and the Germans are losing, they will speed up the process of the Holocaust. They won't divert soldiers from there to the front. So clearly, that is a motivational factor. And then from a purely political standpoint, or like I guess strategical standpoint, uh, Russia had a big army, not a great army, but just a really big army. And so what Hitler was thinking that he would just take them out and that would just solve the potential threat. Now, in terms of the invasion of Russia, I know that we love to start chanting USA, USA, or there's that famous graphic of back-to-back world champions, America, or some nonsense like that. But I'm going to level with you. We won the war, but Russia who really won the war. And a lot of it has to do with the German invasion. So up until this point, the Germans had basically been able to dominate everybody. Battle Britain fell flat, but that part of it was also because it was an island. But they had basically dominated Europe and they conquered France in like 5 weeks. And so they will begin their invasion of Russia expecting a similar outcome. They figured the Blitzkrieg would just quick victory. What they did not anticipate was Joseph Stalin. So Joseph Stalin was willing to sacrifice everything and everyone. In fact, famous story, his son gets kidnapped by the Germans and they think they got Stalin. Like they figured he's screwed, he's going to surrender, he's going to give in, blah, blah, blah. And when he was asked about it, his response was, I have no son. So that kind of tells you a little bit about Stalin there. Like he's like, you will do whatever it takes. So he's willing to sacrifice millions of people. In fact, Russia will lose 25 million people during the course of this war. 25 million. You combine that with World War One and then the Russian Revolution, Russia lost somewhere in the ballpark of almost 50 million people in about 3.5 decades and kept going. So anyway, the famous battle we want to know is the Battle of Stalingrad. All right, so as the Nazis invade, they're making a run for Stalingrad, right? Because Stalingrad has a couple pieces of valuable things. One, right outside of it is massive oil fields. They want that. Also, there's the namesake. So Stalin's willing to sacrifice whatever. By the time the battle is over, All right, just Stalingrad, not the entire invasion of Russia. Russians will lose 4 million people just in Stalingrad. The Nazis lose 800,000, which is still a staggering number. But the reality is, the Russians could have quote afford or were at least willing to sacrifice that many lives. The Nazis, they couldn't afford 800,000 lives, and part of the reason they lost is because again, Russia was willing to simply just throw bodies at the situation. But also, as you can kind of tell from here, the Russians used winter to their advantage. As technologically advanced as the Nazis were, they couldn't take the winters of Russia. The fuel lines would freeze, things wouldn't start, they'd break down, the metal would literally just kind of like come apart because it was so cold it would freeze. So yeah, all these factors come together, and the Nazis suffered massive casualties they couldn't afford, and the Russians couldn't afford either, but they didn't care. They were just going to keep sending the bodies. So this is the turning point in the war, if we're being honest with you, at least in Europe, when the Russians are able to push back Hitler and he suffers massive casualties in the process. That's going to change everything. Now, that's happening in Russia. Let's talk about what's going on in the West or Western Europe. So the Western Front is a big expression. One thing we want to know is essentially the Western Front is this idea, or a second front, is another way we can describe it, is that Stalin was getting his butt kicked, losing millions of lives, and he was screaming for help. He was looking at the British and the Americans going, can you get in the fight here, please? Now, the British are busy fighting all around the world. They've got issues in India. They're dealing with stuff in Australia. We're kind of dealing with our own stuff in Asia too. But Russia's screaming, can you get into Europe? Can you begin invasion of Europe? Because then what would happen was Hitler would have to take his army that was all in Russia and then have to divide it across the two sides. And then basically what would wind up happening would be the two could basically just surround him and conquer him. So Stalin's begging for it, begging to get a second front open. So first attempt was Italy. Winston Churchill famously said that Italy was the weak underbelly of the beast. After controlling North Africa, that basically they could launch a massive invasion of Italy and just go to Germany from there. That is the shortest route. And Italy's military was garbage. Don't have time to talk about it right now, but just to put this in perspective, during the 1930s, they invaded Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian soldiers were able to tip over the Italian tanks. I'm just saying, not the best. Anyway, so the Italians quickly fold, but Hitler reinforces the soldiers in Italy and is able to stop the advancement of the U.S. and British forces through Italy. And also the reality was the Alps, which are these huge mountain ranges on northern Italy, stopped them too, made it harder to make progress. The most important thing we want to know here, though, is this thing called the D-Day invasion, right? If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, that is considered one of the most realistic war movies of all time. The opening scene is the D-Day invasion of Omaha beaches. It is unbelievably horrific, but it was kind of this massive moment where this is what officially opens up that second massive front. So now Hitler has to really divide his forces and split between Russia and what will become the English, the British, and also I hate to say give credit, but like the French, they're kind of helping. Like I know it's weird, right? Anyway, so the invasion of France, aka the D-Day invasion, opens up that second front, and they begin to make relatively rapid advancements. And so, which is what brings us to the Battle of the Bulge. Just real quickly, this is what we call a counteroffensive. Hitler knew he was in trouble. He knew that he was going to lose unless he did something drastic. So the Nazi commanders attempt to basically a massive attack on the advancing British and American soldiers through France. And the reason they call it the Battle of the Bulge is that when the Germans attacked, they went straight for the middle of the line, and the line had to like bend backwards, bulge back, and they came really close to breaking the Allied line. And if they had, they would have been able to sweep behind and probably take out and almost maybe even destroy the advancement of the Americans and the British. Luckily, they held. Now, the other thing was there was this belief that after the D-Day invasion and all the advancements that they had been making in Europe, that this war was going to be over by Christmas. The Battle of Bulge took place in December 44. That essentially eliminated any chance of it being over by Christmas. So the war will continue for even longer, and that's a little significant here. So the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of the European front, and then I'll stop and we'll do the next video in a second, is that Germany will eventually fall. And the reason they're going to fall is, if you can tell from this map right here, right, You got Russia coming this way. You got Allied forces, the British, us, the French coming from the other direction. They're essentially surrounded. Um, and there's no way Hitler at this point could keep two fronts going successfully. Now, the thing I want to highlight here, and it would matter more if the AP was doing the next unit, but they're not. But what happens is Berlin is the prize. We know it, Russia knows it, England knows it. Whoever can get to Berlin first is going to change the dynamic of the post-war rebuild. Unfortunately, the Russians will get there first and control it. Why is that significant? Well, this essentially is one of the factors that's going to build the Cold War. I'm assuming you guys have heard of the Berlin Wall. I'm assuming you know that Germany gets split in all these different parts. If we had gotten there first and had controlled Berlin, we probably wouldn't have split it up. We also probably wouldn't have split up Germany very much, and that would have greatly reduced the tensions that come out following the war during the Cold War. But it wasn't meant to be. All right, so essentially what winds up happening is victory in Europe is declared VE Day. There's a key term because there'll be a VJ Day. We'll talk about in a little bit. So Russia reaches there first. Hitler kills himself. All right. Germany surrenders. So the thing I would normally really stress to you here is in terms for the next unit would be this is going to help set the stage for the Cold War. But again, I don't think they care that much this year. All right, guys, that's the war in Europe. Try to give you the big ideas. Go ahead and move on to the next video. Keep the note-taking sheet, but make sure you got the other things I mentioned at the start. Cool.